Okay, so think about this for a second. The Christian church, it started with just a handful of fishermen following a crucified teacher in a remote Roman province. So how did it become one of the most powerful institutions in all of human history? That's the incredible puzzle we're digging into today, a story of how ideas and institutions can totally transform, raising these huge questions about power and faith that are honestly still so relevant.
So, that's the big question we're really tackling. How did the simple grassroots Church of the Apostles morph into this powerful, complex institution of popes and intricate creeds? It's kind of like we're on a historical detective mission to figure out a transformation that really reshaped the entire Western world.
And the way our source material breaks this down is by zeroing in on this central tension, this pull between the original scriptures on one side and the institutional traditions that grew up around them on the other. It's a fascinating story of faith, power, and, yes, philosophy.
All right, so where does a change this massive even start? Well, the material we're looking at points to one specific moment, when the original apostles, the actual eyewitnesses to Christ's ministry, started to pass away. I mean, that creates a huge leadership vacuum, right? And it brings up a massive question. Who's in charge now? And what you see happening is the series of handovers, one after the other. First, you've got the Apostolic Age, where leadership is all about direct divine revelation. But then, around 100 AD, as the apostles are gone, the leadership baton gets passed to the Apostolic Fathers. These are the guys who actually knew the apostles, and their whole focus was on preserving the teachings. Then, just a bit later, around 150 AD, we see another handover, this time to the early church fathers, who were for the most part really sharp debaters and philosophers. But here's what's absolutely fascinating, and you can see it right here. It's the source of authority that changes. The original apostles, they claimed a direct line to God. We're talking new revelation, binding doctrine, even the power to write scripture. Their successors, though, the Apostolic Fathers, they made no such claim. Their authority came from protecting what had already been revealed. So get this, the whole leadership model flips from revelation to tradition. That's a huge shift.
Okay, so now that the foundation has shifted away from direct revelation, a couple of things happen that just pour gasoline on the fire. Two powerful forces really accelerated the church's transformation: its merger with state power and its deep, deep dive into Greek philosophy. These two things would completely reshape it. 313 AD. You got to remember this year because it was a total game changer. The Emperor Constantine issues the Edict of Milan, which basically makes Christianity legal. I mean, almost overnight, the church goes from this persecuted underground movement to the favorite religion of the Roman Empire. And with that imperial stamp of approval came wealth, influence, and a whole new world of temptations. And then, not even a decade later, you really see the influence of philosophy kick in. At the famous Council of Nicaea, church leaders used this term homoousios to define the nature of God. Now, the key thing to get here is that this word, it's a Greek philosophical concept. You won't find it anywhere in the Bible. This marks a massive step toward defining faith, not with simple scriptural language, but with complex, abstract metaphysics. And as you might guess, this new mix of power and money, well, it led to some pretty deep systemic corruption. And look, we're not just talking about a few bad apples here. The evidence points to things like simony, literally buying and selling your position in the church. There was a period in the 10th century so corrupt it's actually known to historians as the pornocracy. And you had popes like John the XII and Alexander VI, whose lives were just filled with scandal. So how in the world do you explain all this? I mean, how do you go from Peter the fisherman all the way to Pope Alexander VI? Well, the material we're looking at lays out two fundamentally different stories, two competing narratives that try to answer that exact question. On one side, you have what's called the preservation model. This view says the church developed exactly as God intended, and all that corruption, well, that was just the moral failure of certain people, not a problem with the institution or its doctrine. It points to Christ's promise that the gates of hell shall not prevail as proof of an unbreakable, continuous church. But then, on the other side, you've got the apostasy and restoration model. And this view, it's totally different. It argues the church fundamentally fell away from its original foundation, losing both divine authority and pure doctrine along the way. In this view, that promise means Christ's church would ultimately be restored, even if it disappeared for a while. To really get a handle on this second idea, the source material uses a pretty cool analogy, a football game. Think of the original church as the home team. But by halftime, things are looking bad. They're losing, and they're losing badly. That period of apostasy, that's the halftime slump. But the game's not over. The restoration is the epic second-half comeback, where the team rallies and ultimately wins the game. So the case for this apostasy and restoration model, it circles right back to the Bible. The argument is that the picture of God you see in the New Testament is just fundamentally different from the one that was later defined by those philosophical creeds. Take this, for example, Jesus' own words from the Gospel of John. He makes a very clear statement about hierarchy and the relationship. He doesn't say, "My Father and I are of the same substance." He says pretty plainly, "My Father is greater than I." Or how about this moment in the Garden of Gethsemane? This is a moment of just profound anguish. And Jesus prays to the Father, showing two distinct wills are at play here. Not my will, but thine. That distinction, the argument goes, is really hard to square with a doctrine that kind of fuses them into a single being.
And one more. After his resurrection, Jesus tells Mary Magdalene this. He says, "My Father and your Father, and my God and your God." He seems to be placing himself in a relationship to God the Father that's similar to ours, as a distinct being who worships him.
So, what's the big takeaway here? The point being made is that the Bible seems to talk about God in these very simple, relational terms, a father and a son, totally united in purpose, but distinct as individuals. And this clear picture, the argument goes, was later clouded by complex, abstract theology that was borrowed from Greek philosophy. And all of this, it brings us right to the heart of the whole issue, to the ultimate question that this entire historical journey really forces us to think about. It's a choice, really, between two very different foundations for faith. Which leaves us with a final, really big question for you to think about. After tracing this incredible path from fishermen to philosophers, from direct revelation to complex creeds, where does ultimate authority really lie? Is it in the traditions and councils that shaped a global institution over 2,000 years? Or is it found in the plain language of Scripture and in the possibility of personal, direct revelation for yourself? The answer to that question, well, it changes everything.